Hello and welcome to Hoarding Time. I'm Eric, and today I'll be teaching you how to play Horde Mode Magic, a variant of Peter Knudsen's Horde Magic format from 2011. In Horde Mode Magic, survivors use their Magic the Gathering decks to work together in order to survive against an automated, constantly swelling Horde deck. Survivors all play their turns simultaneously. After 3 turns, the Horde begins playing and attacking the survivors' defenses. Horde Magic can be played by 1 to as many players as you feel you can realistically manage. I recommend maxing out around 6, but have played with up to 8 players. In this tutorial, I will describe how to set up the Horde deck, then how to play the Horde, and finally, we'll cover some special Horde rules for dealing with common mechanics interacting with the Horde. In future videos, I will discuss specific Hordes, as well as survivor deck building. Setting up Horde Mode Magic. To set up Horde Mode Magic, the survivors first determine which kinds of decks they will be using. Commander decks, standard decks, custom decks, Canadian Highlander. Whatever format you want to use, you can attempt to fight the Horde with. The next step will be determining which Horde you will be fighting. Hordes are classified by a shared creature subtype and custom Horde-specific spells related to that Horde's tribe. Survivors start with health equal to 40 times the number of players. For this tutorial, human players will be called survivors since both survivors and the Horde are considered players for the purpose of card rules text. Once a Horde type is selected, the survivors will create a Horde area comprised of the following: 4 Horde creature cards, the Horde library, a Horde Swells token, Horde non-combat permanent zone, Horde graveyard, Horde exile area. Let's inspect each area starting with the core identity of the Horde, its creatures. Horde creatures. Horde creature cards represent different creatures in the Horde and are represented in play by a single creature card with Horde counters on them. Horde creature cards must share a creature type with the Horde. The 4 types of Horde creatures are common, dangerous, elites, and lords. When selecting each Horde creature, follow these guidelines. Common Horde creatures should be a token of the Horde creature type with minimal oracle text, except for text that identifies with the Horde, such as Reach for spiders. If there is no token of that creature type, a 1/1 shapeshifter token may be used, except it is considered to only have the Horde's creature type. Dangerous Horde creatures should, like the common Horde creature, have minimal oracle text, but have higher power and toughness than common Horde creatures. Additionally, these should be cards with mana value rather than tokens. Elite Horde creatures should either have much higher power and toughness than dangerous Horde creatures, or some additional utility, such as additional keywords, an on-attack effect, or enter the battlefield effect. Horde Lord creatures should be selected to provide effects across the whole Horde, or effects that trigger when that creature type does something, whether that's die, enter the battlefield, drawing cards, or generate tokens, and we'll talk about what happens later on when a token is generated on the Horde side. When we get to the Horde's gameplay, additionally, I will elaborate on how each of these creatures are managed on the battlefield and what a Horde counter is. For now, let's move on to the Horde library. The Horde library. The Horde library is made up of 100 cards in the following combination: 45 common Horde creatures, 20 dangerous Horde creatures, 9 elite Horde creatures, 1 Horde Lord creature, 10 Horde Swells cards, 15 Horde spell cards. The Horde library serves as both the source of the Horde and the Horde's life total. If damage would be dealt to the Horde, cards are milled from the Horde's library equal to the damage dealt. If the Horde would gain life from an effect, they'll randomly take cards from the Horde graveyard and put them in a random order on the bottom of the Horde's library. The Horde Swells token is where survivors will use Horde Swells counters to track how many times the Horde has played the Horde Swells card. The Horde Swells counters will be used to determine the hand size of the Horde, as well as how many cards are played from the Horde library during the Horde's main phase. These counters cannot be removed or prevented. Non-combat permanents. The non-combat permanent zone will include any non-combat permanents that are played from the Horde library. This can include enchantments, artifacts, or creatures that will be used to affect the battlefield, but not attack. For example, slivers are used as genetic seeds in their horde rather than horde creatures. The Horde Graveyard and Exile. The Horde Graveyard and Exile Zone serves the same role as a standard graveyard and exile. In addition, the Horde's Graveyard has a rule that states if one or more cards would be exiled from the Horde's Graveyard, exile one card from the Horde's Graveyard instead. Now that the Horde is set up, how do you play the Horde? Playing the Horde. The Horde will begin active play after survivors complete their third turn. Each Horde turn will progress through the following phases: beginning, main phase, combat, end phase. In the Horde's beginning phase, the Horde will, first, untap any Horde creatures, second, resolve any upkeep triggers. In the Horde's main phase, the Horde will, first, play cards off the top of the Horde library equal to 2 plus the number of Horde Swells counters on the Horde Swells token multiplied by the number of survivors. Cards all cast simultaneously, but resolve in the following order. All Horde creatures receive their Horde counters, all Horde spells are cast, all Horde Swells counters are added. In the Horde's combat phase, the Horde will declare attackers, survivors will declare blockers and cast spells. Combat damage will resolve per Horde rules, which we will go over later on in this tutorial. In the Horde's end phase, they will resolve any end of turn triggers. Now that we have an idea of how the Horde's turn plays, let's go into more specific details about how the Horde plays from the Horde deck, adds Horde counters, what those Horde counters are, and how the Horde deals with being blocked and blocking, as well as attacking. Playing from the Horde library. Playing from the Horde library refers to revealing a card from the top of the Horde library and then playing or casting the revealed card. For each Horde creature card played, place a Horde counter on the appropriate Horde creature, then put the Horde creature card into the Horde graveyard. For my deck, I use 1/1s to represent common Horde creatures, 2/2s for dangerous Horde creatures, 4/4s for elite Horde creatures, and a 5/5 for the Horde Lord. For each Horde Swells card played, place a Horde Swells counter on the Horde Swells token, then put the Horde Swells card into the Horde's graveyard. Horde enchantments, artifacts, and non-combat permanents are cast. If the card is not countered, it is put into the battlefield in the non-combat permanent zone. If there is no mana value on the card is considered to be cast for 0 mana. All other cards use the printed mana value for the purpose of targeting, countering, and removal. Non-combat creatures cannot block or attack. Horde sorceries are cast, resolved, and then put into the graveyard. Like non-combat permanents, this is considered to be a 0-cost spell for the purpose of being countered. Many Horde sorceries use the Horde Swells counter value to determine their effect. These spells should be calculated based on the number of Horde Swells counters that were on the Horde Swells token at the beginning of the Horde's turn. Now that we have looked at Horde cards in detail, let's look at how Horde creatures are managed on the battlefield through Horde counters. Horde counters. Each Horde counter represents a single creature on the battlefield. If a Horde creature card does not have a Horde counter on it, it is not considered to be on the battlefield. Also, a Horde counter creature has haste, trample, goaded, and will attack as a Horde. Additionally, cards that would destroy, exile, or deal damage to a target creature will target Horde counters individually. For example, Swords to Plowshares, which states exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power, would target only one Horde counter, while River's Rebuke, which states return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hand, would result in all Horde counters on the Horde being removed. Now that we have a basic understanding of how Horde counters work, let's take a look at them in action during the combat phase. In the Horde's combat phase, the Horde will attack with each Horde creature that it can. Each Horde creature card is considered to be a single creature with power equal to the base creature's power multiplied by the number of Horde counters. This is what we refer to as attacking as a Horde. Essentially, each creature attacks as a single entity. For example, a 1/2 spider Horde creature with 10 Horde counters on it would attack as if it was a 10 power Horde creature. However, because each Horde counter is considered an individual creature, blocking gets a little bit more complicated, so let's go over that right now. Blocking Horde creatures. When blocking a Horde creature, survivors determine the order that their blocking creatures take damage. The attacking Horde creature will always deal as much damage to each blocking creature as needed to destroy that creature, up to that creature's toughness. Survivors' creatures blocking Horde creatures can only deal damage to one Horde counter unless they can block multiple creatures or have trample. Horde counters have toughness equal to the base Horde creature's toughness. Since this is complicated, let's look at a few examples using the 1/2 Spider Horde creature. First, let's look at a situation where there are 4 Horde counters on the 1/2 Spider Horde creature. It is attacking the survivors for 4 damage. The survivors have a 1/5 Grizzled Leotau on the battlefield. Their survivors use the Leotau to block, blocking all 4 damage. Since the Leotau does not have 2 power, no Horde counters are removed from the Horde creature. However, if we add a 3/1 Loyal Warhound as a blocker, in this case, the Grizzled Leotau will still take 4 damage from the Horde creatures and survive. The Loyal Warhound will survive, but it and the Loyal Warhound will be able to collectively deal 4 damage to a single Horde counter, destroying it. Even though 4 damage is enough to kill 2 Horde counters, since the Warhound does not have trample, it can only deal damage to 1 Horde counter, and the Leotau, as we saw, cannot deal enough damage on its own to kill a Horde counter. If we change things up a little, instead of a Loyal Warhound, the survivors block with a 3/1 Red Tooth Vanguard with trample. The Red Tooth Vanguard deals 2 damage to kill a single Horde counter, and then both it and the Grizzled Leotau can deal 1 damage each to another Horde counter, allowing 2 Horde counters to be destroyed in the exchange. Once damage has been dealt, the Horde's turn will end and it becomes the survivor's turn. In some cases, the Horde will have creatures with Defender, or some Hordes will create creature tokens with Defender. They will be used to block attacking creatures during the survivor's attack phase. When survivors declare attackers, survivors will choose which attackers will be blocked. Each Horde creature that is blocking can block 1 creature per Horde counter on the Horde creature. All Horde creatures that can block must be used to block. Damage dealt by and to Horde creatures that are blocking are resolved the same way as during the blocking phase of the Horde's combat. Now that we've talked about combat, what happens when players attack? How do you win the game? Let's take a look at that now. Damaging the Horde and winning the game. To win, the Horde library must be empty, and all Horde creatures must have no Horde counters on them. As mentioned in the section on the Horde library, damage dealt to the Horde causes cards to be milled into the Horde's graveyard. If the Horde library is empty, and a card is to be played or milled, the Horde graveyard will be shuffled, and then the remaining cards will be played or milled. The Horde graveyard will be reshuffled into the library a number of times equal to half the number of players rounded down. When the Horde library is empty, and it has already been shuffled the maximum number of times, the Horde enters their last stand state. If the Horde must play cards during its last stand, the Horde will exile cards from the Horde graveyard to add Horde counters to the common Horde creature. If the Horde graveyard is also empty, the Horde will skip its main phase and go directly to combat. If the Horde takes damage during its last stand, the Horde will sacrifice a number of Horde counters with total toughness equal to the damage taken. If there are no more Horde counters left to sacrifice, the survivors win the game. Additional rules. Horde Mode Magic has some additional rules to tune the game's difficulty, prepare it for expanded scenarios, and adapt common mechanics in Magic to work with the Horde. Adjusting difficulty. The first way to tune difficulty is through Horde creature selection. Bigger creatures or adding Death Touch or Menace to common Horde creatures, for example, will make the game much more difficult. Use this as a starting way to tune your Horde. Another way to adjust Horde difficulty is to change the starting number of Horde library cards played per player. Going from 2 to 3 cards per player noticeably changes the speed at which the Horde grows. If your group is finding the Horde creatures are too easy to block, this is a good adjustment to make. Changing the turn the Horde starts attacking should be done if everyone is playing very fast decks and finding themselves sprinting ahead of the Horde. All three of these can be used to increase the difficulty, and in some ways can be used to track how capable your decks are. This will also change depending on which kind of deck. If you're playing casual commander decks, CEDH, standard, or pauper decks, all of these can be used to either increase or decrease the difficulty to allow your team to have a good challenge without it becoming either too easy or too difficult. Now that we've talked about difficulty, let's go ahead and talk about how some of the common mechanics that exist in Magic the Gathering have been changed in order to accommodate the automated deck. First of all, alternate win conditions. Just as in Peter Knutson's version of Horde Magic, Horde Mode Magic turns off the functionality of alternate win conditions. The only way to win in Horde Magic is to fulfill the scenario's win condition. In base Horde mode, this is pushing the Horde to its last stand state and killing all of the Horde creatures. Enter the battlefield effects. Adding Horde counters to a Horde creature will trigger creatures entering the battlefield effects once per Horde creature per turn. Meaning, enter the battlefield effects on the Horde side will trigger up to 4 times maximum per turn. On death effects trigger for Horde creatures when a Horde's counter is removed once per phase. On attack effects will trigger once per Horde creature rather than per Horde counter on that creature. If an effect would cause the Horde to create a token or a mass, instead they will add a Horde counter to the common Horde creature. The exception to this is if the Horde has a spell card that tells them to create a specific token. In that case, that specific token will be created instead. If an effect would cause the Horde to draw 1 or more cards, the Horde will play that many cards from the top of the Horde library instead. If an effect would target the Horde's hand, the effect will target cards from the top of the Horde's library equal to either 7 cards or cards equal to the number of Horde spells counters in play, whichever is greater. Power and toughness effects. Counters, auras, and anthems that add or subtract from a creature's power and toughness affect only the Horde creature's total power and ignore toughness. These effects only apply to Horde creatures if there is a Horde counter on the Horde creature. For example, the 1/2 spider creature token with 3 Horde counters on it would normally attack for 3 damage. But if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, it would attack for 4 damage. Blocking would still be treated the same as far as dealing damage to those Horde counters, they only will have 2 toughness. Tapping Horde creatures. If an effect would cause a Horde creature to become tapped, instead put a stun counter on the Horde creature equal to the number of creatures that would have become tapped as a result of the effect. Stun counters placed on a Horde creature negate but do not remove an equal number of Horde counters on that creature. At the beginning of the Horde's end phase, remove all stun counters from a Horde creature. If a Horde creature has menace, then you will need to block the Horde creature with pairs of creatures. If there are planeswalkers on the battlefield, the Horde will attack the planeswalker with the highest loyalty with the highest ranking Horde creature on the battlefield. If there are multiple planeswalkers with the highest loyalty, then the planeswalker to be attacked will be randomly selected. The Horde can only attack 1 planeswalker per turn. Damage beyond the planeswalker loyalty will be dealt to the survivors. There you have it. That's Horde Mode Magic. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please like and subscribe. I'll be updating this channel with new Hordes and new Horde-specific gameplay. If you have any questions or would like to propose a change to the rules, please leave a comment down below. Also, let us know about any games that you've played, or if you post any videos online of you playing Horde Mode Magic. We'd love to see it here. Hold the line, Planeswalkers.